Excellent, thank you. Is this good? Yeah, cool. Okay, so if you don't know, my name's Sean Kennedy, and I'm a visual effects artist from Los Angeles. I worked at Rhythm and Hues for almost 8 years. If you don't know who they are, they won a couple Academy Awards for visual effects. We won one for Life of Pi this year, and a few years ago we won one for Golden Compass. They were kind of known for doing animals and things like that, and I was a compositor there. Before that, I worked at some smaller studios and some other bigger studios, and at the smaller studios, I did a little bit of everything. I was mainly a compositor, but I did a little bit of 3D, just little background things. I wasn't animating characters or anything. But one of the things, when I went to Rhythm and Hues, one of the things that bugged me a little bit was they're so big, everything's very departmentalized. So I was just a compositor. If I needed anything 3D, I had to go through all those proper channels of requesting something, and do we have budget, and then it's got to go through, modeling, or, look development, and modeling, and rigging, and texturing, and 12 supervisors have to look at it. And if the smallest thing you'd want, like some tiny little thing way in the background that's out of focus, if you requested it, it could be months. So it was, that was a little frustrating coming from a small shop where I could just crank out anything I wanted, open any program I wanted, and just do something. Also, a little bit of my background, pre-Blender. I used 3D Studio Max for quite a few years, and also After Effects and Digital Fusion, a little bit of Nuke. I was at Rhythm and Hues by the time Nuke came up, and Rhythm and Hues used their own proprietary software, which I believe was based a lot on Shake, but then they also kind of worked in a lot of Nuke type things into it, which I actually have some screenshots of Rhythm and Hues' proprietary software. This is kind of what it would look like. What a typical node setup would look like for a shot. There's another one a little closer. It looks complex because there's a lot of things, but it's pretty straightforward. Like all these purple nodes are roto nodes. The dark blue ones are collapse nodes. You can open them up and there's more node networks inside. And it can get crazy, but the yellow things are just comment nodes. It's not as complex as it seems, but it can get complex, of course. But and this was our viewer that we would look at the image in. Anyway, the kinds of things, only being a compositor there frustrated me a lot. Especially, like, there were times when they'd say, we'd have a green. I'll show you in a little bit, actually. It'd be like a green screen shot of an actor, and we'd be putting like an ocean behind them, and they would say, it'd be great if we just had birds in the background, but birds require all that stuff I was just talking about, look dev and modeling and rigging and animation, and it's just going to be 10 pixels just fluttering by, and it's going to be defocused, it's going to be gray, just a blob of gray moving. It didn't need to be all that, some $20,000 bird back there. And it really frustrated me that I couldn't, our program didn't have any kind of particle system. It had 3D, but it was a very, it wasn't like in After Effects. You could just switch over to 3D and make a couple planes and make a bird, but it wasn't as easy to do that in this environment. So I would go home and I would either in After Effects or in 3D Studio Max, and I would make birds and just render them out as a black and white file set, just a little alpha channel of it, and I would bring that in. I originally would bring it into Rhythm and Hues. Also had a policy of you're not allowed to install anything on their computers. All the USB drives and hard drives were, CD drives were all disabled. They didn't want artists bringing in all their own stuff to clutter these computers. So we had internet access. So later on, I learned I could email them to myself. But at first, I would just bring in, I'd bring in disks, and I'd go to our input-output department and ask them to put that in a temporary folder somewhere on the network for me. And they would just copy it over. And then we also had our own proprietary file set, which was very similar. I don't know if you're familiar with OpenEXR, but it's pretty much the same thing. It'll let you save multiple layers into one big, floating point file set. But it was, they would move this my disk onto a temporary thing. I would copy it somewhere, all in a Linux shell typing, which I'm not a big fan of. I like dragging and dropping. And I'd copy it, and then I'd have to convert it by typing, and some automatic LUT would be applied to it, so the colors would always be different. It was a huge hassle, but I would get these birds in, and they'd be in the background. Eventually, I started emailing to myself, Dropboxing them to myself, made it a little bit easier. I didn't have to go through the in and out department. But I can show you some examples of some of the things I did. This is before I found Blender, just some little things. And you'll see how minimal the kinds of, I have a Land of the Lost clip, but I don't know if you guys remember that Will Ferrell movie. But you can't really see. I thought you would see it, but it's not, on DVD quality, it doesn't really show up. But in these God rays, there's little particles floating around. And that was like the first thing I ever did at home, and then took it in. And as soon as somebody saw it in one of my shots, I had to give it out to the whole team. So I had to tell everybody where the file set was. And all of a sudden, all the God rays had little particles in it, and they loved it. And that was sort of the start of me bringing in my own things. But you can't really see them, but they're in there somewhere. If you have this movie by any chance on HD, you'll see it. But then these are the birds. If you look right down here, see that little thing there? That's an After Effects bird. Once I made those, they kind of started showing up everywhere. They're in the background of this scene. This is the scene I actually originally made it for. You can't really even see them. It's so defocused. If I skip ahead a little bit, you'll see them. So there they are. Those are After Effects birds. They ended up all over this scene as well. And they actually ended up in a lot of movies. Like other movies I wasn't even working on would ask me for the bird pass, and I'd just email them the location, and it would end up in all kinds of things. So I also did little things like this is Night and Day, a Tom Cruise movie, and we had sparks. They wanted sparks bouncing off this motorcycle, and we didn't have, we had a very limited practical library of stuff, so I wanted sparks that kind of like curved around the body of the motorcycle there, so I just went home and made some in 3D Studio and emailed them to myself. It's like 6 frames. It's not even that much. But we just couldn't do that at work. It was very frustrating. There's little things. This is a scene from Red Riding Hood, this wolf jumping around. And there's little things like when he's running in the, is it really dark? When he's running in the sand, he's kicking up some sand, and when he jumps on the roof, little things fall off the roof, and those were all just little particle things I made, and I think I did all that in After Effects on my laptop actually at work. I even brought one of the elements. This is just the kind of thing it was. It was just stupid little things like this, but it was really hard to do that in this environment. And if I would have had the effects department at work do that, it just would have been a month-long hassle probably to get this kind of thing. So that was all very frustrating, the whole doing things at home, bringing them in. If they did by any chance, if it was something big enough that they, like if the birds were flying in there, like, can we make the birds flap a little slower? Can that one not flap? I'd have to wait until I got home, change it, email it to myself. So the turnaround was a little slow. When Big Buck Bunny came out, I bought Big Buck Bunny and had it mailed to work because I'm at work all day, just get my mail there. So Ton noticed where it was being sent and emailed me and asked about, they were about to come in for SIGGRAPH and asked about maybe doing a presentation at Rhythm and Hues. So I kind of helped set that up. And that was the first time I met Ton and the whole Big Buck Bunny crew or whoever was there. But Rhythm and Hues kind of freaked out a little bit about that whole thing, which was a little odd. I think they felt a little threatened because of the whole don't use other software, don't install other software. They made me send out a little email saying no one is to install Blender on their machines, even though Blender was already installed on the machines, which was very strange. Because Rhythm and Hues was a Linux studio, everything was Linux, and they had Inkscape, they had Blender 249 installed. Which I tried to learn it actually. I tried to learn 249, but I couldn't get, the interface was a little funky. So I wasn't, once they came and they did their presentation, kind of opened my eyes a little bit more to Blender. I didn't know it had a video editor and a compositor and things like that. So shortly after that, the Rhythm and Hues moved to El Segundo. They moved a city down south. And when they moved, Blender was no longer installed on our machines for some reason. And shortly after that, 2.5 came out. So I realized I tried downloading it once just to check out the new interface everyone was talking about. And I realized it didn't install. I thought it would have to install, but it didn't. It just ran. And that instantly made me think, oh, this kind of bypasses the whole Rhythm and Hues law of not having to install anything. So that was when I thought, oh, and then the interface was better. So I'm like, I think I could work with this. So I started, my goal was to learn particles and learn how to do little effectsy things. So I started doing that, and then I found sculpting. I didn't know it did sculpting. I found that, and then I got sidetracked for like 3 months of just, I was doodling every day. I always had it open. Anytime I had a down second, I'd go sculpt something. So then, yeah, I started using it to make something. And of course, one of the first things I set up was my little bird file. I actually have it here. If I can see if it works here. Yeah, it made it into Hunger Games actually. That's the actual. I don't own Hunger Games, so I couldn't like rip from the DVD the shot it's in. But I did bring in the file if it's ever going to start up. Come on. But they're, oh, get out of the way. There's my birds. These are actually far more elaborate than my After Effects birds ever were. But it's just one bird. I copied it 2 times, offset the animation, and then made it a particle system, and bam, birds. Anytime anybody wanted them, I dropped in a background image. I adjusted the camera to roughly the right direction and angle, and hit render, and there it was. Asked them how many they wanted, bam. So it was like if I go to the camera view on this, you can't even see them, right? I don't even know where they are. I don't even know where they are. Oh, there they are. Oh well, they're in there somewhere, but you can see. I'm the wrong. Maybe they're over here. There they are. So that's how they would usually show up in a shot, something like that. And even then, once we took it into the shot at Rhythm and Hues, you might scale it down and blur it and stuff. So they're tiny, but they made it into all kinds of things. They were. I think I have a shot from Alvin and the Chipmunks 3. They're stuck on an island, the volcano explodes, and right down here, you can see some birds flying around. So, birds are everywhere. I think they might have been in that last X-Men movie. They're in all kinds of things. But then there was a movie a couple years ago called Big Miracle, which was a Drew Barrymore whale. She goes up to Alaska and saves some whales. And that was one of the first projects I was a compositing lead on. So I was sort of, there was a sequence supervisor, and then I was sort of like in charge of all the compositors a little bit. And that gave me a little bit more time to make things for the team. So I would do things like, I got a little bit more involved with Blender then. So I would do things like, in this shot, when Drew Barrymore goes underwater to talk to the whales and see them actually, there's, the little debris in the water, the little particle things. That was Blender. That was one of the first things I used it for on this. And I did 2 passes. I did one that you can actually, I don't know can you guys see them? They look pretty, I don't know. But there is particle floating around in the water. And then there's some really close ones that are defocused. But that was all Blender. There's this kind of, in this little scene, there's, it's very subtle, but there's snow blowing. There's in all these snow scenes, to make it look cold, we would put atmospheric things. And we had a few stock elements, but a lot of times we didn't have close-up things or things that were real close to the ground. So I messed around with the smoke simulations tools, and I learned just enough to be able to make some smoke. I even brought the elements, where are they? Like this kind of thing. It's really low res, it's really crappy, but if you scale it down and you roto it so the edges are soft and you throw it in front of somebody's feet, and it looks perfect. I really had no clue what I was doing when I was making this either. I followed online tutorials. I'd make a box, I'd put it in there, and then I would just if I needed the smoke to go down, I would rotate the camera instead of every time I rotated the box, the smoke broke or something. So I would just find ways to cheat it. I also did. There was a couple scenes where these helicopters are towing this barge, and this was another one of these things where there was a flag. There's real footage of this. This was a true story, so there's real footage of this barge being dragged by these helicopters, and the barge had a flag on it, and the supervisor wanted a flag on it, and effects was super busy. We were doing a lot of water simulation stuff on this movie with whales jumping out of water and stuff. And they were super busy with that. We had a real small effects team, so they didn't have time to make a flag. So that was my first cloth sim in Blender, was making a flag for this barge, which it's incredibly tiny, but it's in there. I have another shot. I didn't composite this shot, but I made a few elements. Pretty much everything in this shot that's moving, except for the people, is all Blender. So like the little flag that's there, right there, and there's some rubber flaps on this hovercraft flapping, and then there's all the smoke that's blowing in front of it. That's all elements from Blender. Otherwise, it's just a matte painting and some guys walking around on a green screen. So this shot made me very happy, because this was like all in the same shot. I got a cloth sim, a smoke sim, I got all kinds of things. It's all Blender, all free software. And we'd go to dailies and people would say, where'd the flag come from? And I'd just say, I made it. And they wouldn't even ask. They wouldn't say, well, how'd you make that? They'd just, oh, cool, great. Can you make one for the other shot? So no one would ever say anything. It was much later, like near the end of the movie, where people would start saying, how are you doing that? And I'd say, Blender. And they'd say, that free program? And I'd say, yeah, come by. So they'd come by my desk and I'd show them, and everybody would leave my desk saying, I should look into that. I should learn that. But go ahead. A few looked into it. I'll get to the end of the story. I did a little class and things. A few got into it a little bit. What else did I do? Let's see. There was Life of Pi, of course, which I worked on Life of Pi, but the sequence that I squeezed a little bit of Blender in, I didn't work on that sequence, but I was sitting with a sequence supervisor. He sat in the same room as me, and his team was doing this flying fish scene where all these flying fish come out of the water, and they wanted droplets to hit the camera lens. And because our compositing program didn't have any kind of particle thing, the supervisor had worked out this system with doing the refraction and the defocused water droplets, all using the tools that we had, but he needed like a particle system just to drive it to like little just white dots, so people wouldn't have to roto little, like an input mat basically to where these drops were going to happen. So he asked me, can I run off 100 frames of just like white particles popping on? So it took literally 3 minutes, I think, to make, and I gave it to him, and he put it into this little tool for the whole team to use. So anywhere that there's water droplets hitting the lens, there may have been a few that they did by hand or something, but I think a lot of them are Blender particle-driven things. So, and it's subtle. I saved a couple screenshots from it, but it's with not being in motion. Like here's one right here. There's a couple up here. So they're really subtle, but they put you. Whatever, that's one right there. So it's very subtle, but it's in there a little bit. What else did I do? What else? I also worked on I spent most of the last year and a half I was there working on a movie called R.I.P.D., which was recently out and completely bombed. It's fine, I don't have any financial obligation, but I used it a little bit in that too. We had a bit more of an effects team, so I didn't get to do as much as like I did on the whale movie, but there was a few times I got to, I think I made, let me open it back up, I can show you little things I did. I did the glass hits. We did the sequence I was on, we had a sequence where these cars are driving down the street and these buildings are collapsing. This giant vortex opens up inside this parking garage and all the buildings start collapsing and cars are falling. So it was called the raining car sequence. And there were times when cars would hit and you'd see it, and they wouldn't give us effects for like the windshield shattering or something. So that was one of the things I did was, I hope this, yeah, it kept all the background and everything. Excellent. It's very subtle, but, oh, it's not even gonna, let me get it where a timeline is. Ooh, it's all squished on my computer. I can barely see what's going on. But can you see that? Can you see where there's like glass hitting the ground there? It's like a little windshield hitting. Is that better? That thing. So it's subtle things like that. And it's, this shot was probably under a second in the movie, but it's little things like that that I would use it for on this. And there was another scene where this scene right here, the street he's driving down is pretty clear. So most of the debris that's here and wrecked things is all CG. And we were having some trouble. Whoever was lining up the stuff on the sidewalk couldn't get it close enough to the camera that the supervisor wanted. So after a while, I set up a scene. I may have it here. Yeah. I should stop closing Blender. Come on. I set up this really basic scene. I didn't track it or anything like that. Yeah, there we go. But it's just random rocks. They're not even that good. They're like really crappy geometry. But they were all just blurred. So I just did that basically. Threw in some things, put them where I knew they needed to be, rendered them out, and now we have debris in there in the right spot. For some reason, they couldn't get it. They needed to be too far out on the street or too far behind the camera. You couldn't see anything. And rather than fight for a whole day over it, I just said, I'll do it. I'll fix it. Don't worry about it. So it's that kind of stuff. What else? Percy Jackson, which was the last movie I worked on there before I was laid off along with 600 other people this year. There was a shot I had where they're inside the belly of this sea monster, and they had done a matte painting of all this like debris and other wrecked things that this sea monster had eaten. And in the matte painting, there was this little cross thingy with these nets hanging off it. And they wanted me to 2D warp these nets so they'd look like they were just moving slightly. And, a net, if you're seeing the front and the back of a net and you warp it, it's not gonna look right. If you need some kind of three-dimensional movement. So all I did was deformed a sphere, hung it on a little thing, made it a cloth sim, and then I think I just rendered it with the wireframe. I don't think I did, and that was it looked enough like net that it was fine. So I just did that, and it worked. I have a few other screenshots just of setting it up, but it was super basic, like a few forces in there just to move it around a little bit. I think is this it? Yeah. See, it's really subtle, but they loved it. They asked me, is that just a warp? And I told them, nope, did a cloth sim for it. And they always made it sound like a cloth sim, like, holy cow, wow, that must have, like it's, hard work. But if anybody's ever done a really basic cloth sim, if anybody's followed a flag tutorial, it's not that hard. It's super, Blender makes it easy. So there's all things like that. And then, of course, birds. Got to get it in the last movie I worked on there. So, but I think, so that's how I got it in at Rhythm and Hues. I used it a lot there. Enough people had asked me about it in the course of all that I started bugging management, like, hey, can I do like a lunchtime thing? Can we have a room that has some computers in it and we can put Blender on it? And anybody that wants to learn, I'll show them how to make birds, and they can make their own birds and little smoke things. But they got real antsy about that. Like, no, we don't want you to install anything. I'm like, what if we all bring it on flash drives and nobody has to even install anything? No. So I fought that for a long time. And it was very odd because in India, we had two facilities owned by Rhythm and Hues. And they did it all the time. They did Blender classes in the evening. They even they recorded those classes, uploaded them to the internal website so anybody could watch them. They did all kinds of stuff. They were using Blender, I think, a while back to, when you get scan data in from actors and things, the mesh is a disaster, so they were using Blender to clean that up. I think they had tried using writing some photo modeling tools for it at one point. So the India facilities were really into Blender, and I don't know why they were being so standoffish about LA doing it. But eventually I persuaded them to let me do that. So, but the rule was everybody had to bring their own computers. So we started this thing on every Thursday at lunch. A few of us would get together in a room and start learning Blender and all that. And it's all the usual stuff. Like everybody complains about right click, but then 2 weeks later, everybody's blown away by dynamic paint. Like, oh, every program should have this. So it was really fun. It was fun watching everybody cross over from this is weird to this is amazing. And then there's a training. In LA. There's a whole bunch of training facilities that will. If you want to learn ZBrush or learn other like Nuke or other high-end programs, you could do training. And if you already worked at a visual effects facility, there was some sort of California program that you could take the classes for free. The training company would somehow be reimbursed from the state for some kind of continuing education thing. So we were allowed to take classes for free at this one place. And I contacted the guy that ran that place and said, could we get a little Blender thing going? Because I think there's a lot of people here that would be into that. So he agreed, and they had a room set up in one of the spare rooms at Rhythm and Hughes, and we put all these. He brought their own computers, and they all had Macs. And because they weren't Rhythm and Hughes computers, he was happy for me to put Blender on them. And I did a 10-week class, and it was awesome. I tried to show a little bit of everything. I worked everybody through a scene, cycles, everything, a little bit of physics and effects stuff, and it was amazing to see. I had supervisors in there. I had people that just input output people that didn't even do creative stuff at Rhythm and Hughes. So it was really fun. It was great to see everybody left impressed and loved it and wanted to continue with it. So it was really good. And my goal was to do another intro class, and then hopefully out of those two classes I would have enough people to do like a Blender 201 class. But then the bankruptcy thing happened, so didn't get to do that. But it was really good. There was a lot of people. There was a guy that left Rhythm and Hughes and was going back to Utah and to work on his own independent features and stuff like that. He had a friend who was producing things and had a $2 million budget, and he constantly emails me about, what if we use Blender for the pipeline, and like just little questions. Do you think you can do this? And my answer is always yes. Of course I can. So since April, I've been freelancing as well. I have enough contacts and stuff like that I got a whole bunch of like short films, and I got a feature film and things. So now that I'm at home and I'm just working by myself, I can use whatever software I want. So I started using Blender more and more. So I have a bunch of screenshots and some clips from that. One of the first things I got was a pretty easy thing. It was I don't know if anybody knows what the Lifetime Network is in America, but it's all like dramas like a mom finds out that her 16-year-old daughter was actually not her daughter, it was switched at birth, and like dramas like that, like silly, like almost like daytime soap things, but a little over the top. So they were doing this, a friend of ours was doing a Christmas movie for that network. And it was all pretty simple things like monitor inserts and things. So I thought this will be my first. I'm going to try and do everything on this show all in Blender. So I did, and it worked awesome. I did a whole ton of these like monitor inserts, which they were nothing great, but I was learning like the roto tools. I hadn't touched the roto tools before this show, so it was great to get up. And I was learning node boxes and just getting comfortable with the whole like how to do 2D only things in Blender. So that was a lot of fun. And you can see some of they're not that complex or anything, just her face and the hair over it, nothing tough. But that's a lot of what this was. Just a lot of roto up here, all that, nothing fancy, but that was what, I think these are all just monitors, yeah, nothing great. So did a lot of stuff like that. There was I did one particle thing. They wanted at the end, the end of the movie ends on a big pan up into New York sky, and it snows, and they wanted snow to form the end, so I did that in Blender. So just like little things, and then I got a short film where I had to do some fire effects, and I hadn't touched I've goofed around with the fire and I'd follow tutorials and stuff, but I didn't really try to learn it. So I actually tried to really learn the fire effects. So I did for this short film. It's real quick. The guy wanted it. This first shot isn't. This is just practical elements, but the second shot is all Blender fire. So I actually had to learn it for once, which was nice. It was good to actually understand what was happening and being able to, if I wanted the smoke to fall, I didn't have to rotate the camera. I could just make it fall. So that was fun. That was good. And I did a lot of other things in it. I did, I have this shot actually. These wings come out of her back and I made her back deform when that's happening and all that. So nothing super exciting, but like you can see, it's just a little patch of skin that's just deforming, nothing fancy. But I wrote a lot on this show. I did a lot of these little green screen cleanups and a lot of cleaning up. That's one of the biggest things, and if you're going to go do visual effects for Hollywood, is there's so much cleaning up. People get so lazy now with because they know we can do it. So they'll leave things in set, people walking through set, there's all kinds of stuff. They won't build half the set, all kinds of things. So this is all cleanup. This is all, like in this shot, there were wires under the door and they happened to be in the shot. So I had to make a patch and wrote all around him. And this is the silly body thing I made for the fires. This shot they did this gigantic overhead shot and there's tire tracks all over the shot. So I had to paint those out and it was pretty easy stuff. But again, it was another thing where I just wanted to use Blender and really I didn't want to go to all the tools I'd been using for 10 or 15 years. I was trying to stay just in Blender and it's amazing. It's so much fun. It's so great that there's for years there was no free compositing program. So it's awesome just to be able to do this stuff. So yeah, that's I have things from that feature I'm working on, but I don't think I can show that. I think that's all under NDA. And there's other things I did. I did a lot of on RIPD. There was a big shot where this time thing explodes and this gigantic sphere of stopping time moves through this room. And the guy doing that shot asked me about putting reflections on this sphere. So I camera tracked that shot, made a sphere, just eyeball matched it up with what our effects department had done, and then rendered a reflection pass of the room. I made a crappy room and projected onto it, so the reflection was semi-close. Gave him that, and that, things like that make it into the movie. So there's a lot of other little places like that where I would help people out with stuff. But so yeah, that's what else is that? I think that's it really. Yeah, so that's how I was sneaking Blender into Hollywood things, and now I'm just doing it full on with Blender. So, does anybody have any questions? Anything? Do I got to go around with the? Yeah.
It's more a comment and a question. It's just nice to see the way that you've used Blender and what you've shown today is there's a strong perception in visual effects that everything has to be perfect and correct and physically right, but you're showing the attitude and the kind of approach where it's just make it work on the day. And
that's the whole thing. That's what I actually thought that when I went to Rhythm and Hues, I actually thought like, oh, this gigantic Academy Award-winning facility, and they're gonna have the best software, and everything's gonna be perfect, and I'm not gonna have to do anything. I'm just gonna have to put edge blur and light wrap on things and be done with it. But everything was just like, just make it work, make it look good. The deadline's coming, just do something. So it was a whole other. It was exactly the opposite of what I thought it would be. The software was. Could have been better. It was fine it was more designed for putting, at least this is my own thoughts. Rhythm Hughes is really good at doing animated characters in live action movies like Garfield and Yogi Bear and Scooby-Doo and Alvin and the Chipmunks and all that kind of stuff. And the software was very good at that. Incorporating a CG character into a live action thing is spectacular for that. But generating things from scratch, it was tough. You always had to start with something. Like you had to bring in like cloud footage and then warp it and do weird things to it, and then you'd eventually have some kind of magic crystal thing or something. So it wasn't very good at generating from scratch. So that's where I was trying to fill that gap with Blender.
Thank you. from a compositor point of view, as an artist, what would you see improved in the Blender compositor as a main question? And the second one, if you work in some sort of pipeline, since you are a single artist right now, a freelancer, how are you managing your work? Are you with a team? Are you alone doing freelance work for other company?
I'll do the second question first, but it's just me, so I'm keeping track of things. I do have Jonathan is doing a model for me that I was a little nervous about doing. I'm not very good at matching likenesses, or at least not in a deadline anyway. So Jonathan's doing some modeling, and then I've asked Jeremy from Tears of Steel to do some animation when I get to that point. But I'm doing a lot. Most of it is just me sitting there doing it. And as far as like pipeline or anything, it's mostly just however I want to organize it. I mean, I'm using little tricks and things that I've just learned over the years for naming and how to organize things and all that. And Francesco's writing some software that's going to help a little bit, I think. I'm going to bug him a little bit more about that as soon as I can get him out of that back room there. But as for the compositor being better, we could have a whole conference on just that. So that you should find Sebastian and ask him whatever he says. Do that. So it's great to see it. It's coming along. It's got a great keyer now. It's got roto. You can do things, but I do find myself sometimes going back to After Effects for like warping tools or things like that. Or there's some canvas issues with Blender's compositor that make it tricky to do some things. There's the way when you bring in things of different sizes, the way when you overlap them, you can't blur the smaller thing, the edges crop. There's weird little things like that are frustrating, but that's why I'm here, to help bring attention to that, and that if it's fixed, we'll use it more. Cool.
Okay, one last question.
This is just more a comment. For the longest time, I've really, really hated flocks of birds. I think you've just made me halfway respect them again.
Right on. I'm glad the birds achieved something. So.
Okay.
Lunchtime. No, that's good.
Okay, this is it. Thank you very much. Lunchtime. Oh, yes. There is a short announcement. Oh, actually, yeah. We have a short announcement.
Hello. Is this working? We're trying to stop the Germans having all the fun, and we're trying to have a very impromptu UK meeting for Blender heads here. So if you're in the UK and you're using Blender, can you just hang back a bit? We're trying to find out who you are so we can try and get some events happening in the UK if possible. Okay?
And then the UK can also go to have lunch after they've met up here. You don't have to stay here.
Why start using Blender and not Houdini, for example? What is the reason?
I don't know. Well, we had Houdini there, but there was sometimes there'd be problems with licenses. Like when Rhythm and Hues only had a certain amount of licenses. They'd have like 30 licenses. So if it was a busy day and everybody was doing stuff, there'd be no free licenses. Or else I could have opened that and started messing with that. But I also like that. It's the same on everything. So at work I had Linux, at home I had Windows. The little studio I used to work in was a Mac studio. So if I learned Blender, I could use it everywhere. I could transfer, I would make a file at home. If the bird setup was taking too long, I'd go home and work on it all night, email it to myself, and now I'd have it at work. And it just opened on everything. It was just, it seemed a little nicer than, a little more flexible than Houdini.
You can't do that with Houdini?
I don't know. Okay. I don't know, but I didn't have Houdini at home, and so I just ran. And then I knew too, like when the Big Buck Bunny folks came, and I had seen that it had like a video editing, compositing. I just wanted to learn it all anyway. So I thought, why not just, it can do the birds too. So
all in one.
yeah. So just gave it a shot. So how's it going?